So I was sitting here working on a video about different players that I'm intrigued by and I'm really interested in watching in 2025. And some of the guys are kind of obvious: Trevor Lawrence, Travis Hunter. I even think Britton Strange is pretty intriguing. But I came upon a defensive line and I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to see Josh Hines Allen again after the year he had last year. A little bit disappointing. Trayvon Walker going into year 4. Will he be in like a big time form? Eric Armstead moving his more natural position. How about Mason Smith going into year 2? And really, like, there's like a lot going on in the defensive line that really feels like it deserves its own video. And when you actually look at everything, I'm not someone who really, at this point, it's June. I don't like to look back at 2024 or 2023 for that matter. But I do think that when you're talking about a defensive line, it's good to revisit 2024 in a sense of like what happened to the Jaguars, what was going on with the Jaguars. And it when Doug Peterson, after the 2023 season, when the team nosedived at the end of the year, went 1-5, missed out in the playoffs, Shad Khan had a meeting with Doug Peterson, kind of saying, "Hey, like, what needs to improve? What do you had to do to get better in 2024 so this doesn't happen again?" And he alluded to the fact that they need a new defensive coordinator. And what did they do? They fired Mike Caldwell and they brought in Ryan Nielsen as the new defensive coordinator. And, at first it was pretty exciting. I mean, he had a good year for, Atlanta in his sole year as defensive coordinator there. There was some good word out about him from the New Orleans Saints, especially when it comes to his work on their defensive line. But when you actually revisit it, he was a one and done, and he might have been one of the worst coordinator hires in Jaguars history. And look, there's a long list of bad coordinator hires, but he was pretty bad. And obviously, the whole Jaguars coaching staff and everything got turned over. But there were some really weird things about him. I mean, the mass substitutions were weird with Ryan Nielsen. The blown coverages in the defensive backfield was really bad. And, the defensive line, supposedly, they were playing rock, paper, scissors on who was going to go in the next series. So it was just awful. The coaching was awful. Everybody on a defense regressed. And you really want to look at kind of a case study with the defensive line and, some of the strangest things that happened. Now, number one was the weight gain. Now, it's kind of came out after the season, like what he actually wanted the Jaguars to do when it comes to weight gain. But, Josh Hines Allen met with the media last week, just kind of speaking about, this new year and all this different stuff. And, Josh Hines Allen had 17 and a half sacks in 2023, career high, third most in the NFL that year. Incredible year where he got a contract extension, right? Then in 2024, he only came up with 8 sacks. And Nielsen had him weighing in at 285. He wanted a bunch of guys to gain weight, but not all weight gain is good weight, right? He gained 285. And what was his weight in 2023? When I looked it up, the websites are saying 255. So he put on 30 pounds in 1 year. After a career year, he put on 30 pounds. That is insane. That's not a 5-pound gain. That's not a 10-pound gain. That is a 30-pound gain. And I can't believe that, if you have 17 and a half sacks 1 year, don't do anything different. I'll have 17 and a half sacks every single year for the rest of Josh Hines Allen's career on the Jaguars. And if you do that every year, you have a Hall of Fame defensive end, right? But yeah, back to 8 sacks, not even like half the amount of sacks that he had the year prior. Not good. Trayvon Walker admitted that he gained a bunch of weight. Didn't really say exactly how much he got up to, but he's back kind of playing at what he thinks is a healthy size. So this new year, it'll be really interesting to see like what the new strength and conditioning staff does when it comes to the defensive line and where they are at with the health and nutrition for the Jaguars this season. And, hopefully they can get these guys at the perfect balance between being able to be, strong and hard to push, but also enough speed and to be able to get around the edge and to be quick and to beat the offensive tackle on different moves that you want to make. So the weight gain was strange. Eric Armstead going back to his natural position at defensive tackle. Now, it was a weird year in 2024 because he started off injured, so we didn't really see him at all do training camp and preseason, and he was finally healthy in week 1. And, we thought that he was going to, if I remember correctly, like in my head, I was thinking like, oh, he's going to play some defensive end, but I didn't think he was going to be exclusively defensive end, right? I thought he was going to be, playing a lot of defensive tackle, going out to defensive end, but he was exclusively there, and you would have thought that, hey, with the Jaguars doing bad and him not maybe being his best self, maybe you move him back to defensive tackle. It never happened. So, and there was kind of this misconception out there that Eric Armstead signed with the Jaguars because he wanted to be defensive end, and the Jaguars were the team that's going to allow him to play defensive end. But he came out after the season saying that he didn't want to play defensive end. He wanted to play defensive tackle. So it goes back to this Jaguars being a complete mess in 2024. Nobody was on the same page about anything. The front office and the coaching staff wasn't on the same page. Clearly, we saw on the field that the players and the coaching staff were on the same page. Nobody was bought into anything, and it resulted in the Jaguars being 4-13. And thank God that it forced the Jaguars to basically flip the whole entire organization. And this is one reason I always get heat, maybe not through YouTube, but really on Twitter, that if the Jaguars are bad, I just root for them to bottom out, right? There's not a whole lot of difference between going 6-11 and 4-13. I was someone that said, hey, bottom out, get the best draft pick. The Jaguars were still able to get Travis Hunter, although if they lost like one more game, they would still have a first-round pick next year. But it is what it is. We don't have it. I'm not going to dwell on that too much. But if the Jaguars would have gone 6-11, or hey, maybe they go 8-9. Is that going to really force Shad Khan to completely clean house? Maybe Trent Baalke is still here. That's just what it is. But yeah, the Jaguars bottomed out, knew everything, went on a side tangent there. But yeah, like Eric Armstead, I'm happy that he's going back to playing his natural defensive tackle position, and that should be a mega boost. It should be a mega boost, right? I mean, he was a disruptor for the 49ers when he was, defensive tackle, and, there was a reason why he kept signing new contracts. But 31 years old now, he's not getting any younger, so he's going into the last few years of his prime, although defensive tackles can, play for quite some time. So, I mean, I'm hoping that we at least get 2 more good years out of him, and, I would be happy with that. But regardless, 2025 should hopefully be a good year for him, and hopefully he can find some of his former form. Mason Smith, going into year 2, it was another really strange case here where, he started off playing, he showed some, bright spots, and then he was like a healthy scratch for a while, and then like he turned from a healthy scratch to actually being like on the injury report with an ankle. Then all of a sudden he comes back and it still shows some flashes, and then the year was over. Didn't really give him much of an opportunity to flourish, and this seemed like a similar case that, you guys remember in 2021 where Urban Meyer wasn't playing Andre Cisco, and it almost seemed like it was something where like Urban Meyer was sticking it to Trent Baalke. It felt like the same exact thing with Mason Smith in 2024, right? It felt like, Doug Peterson wasn't playing him to kind of stick it to Trent Baalke. I don't know what kind of games these guys are playing, but we didn't have grown-ups that felt like in the building last year. At least, nobody wanted to coach and play for Trent Baalke, but yeah, Mason Smith going into year 2. He looks good. He looks physical. I'm hoping that, last year he looked a little bit healthy, or a little bit heavy, I should say. I would have liked to, maybe convert that into a little bit of muscle, but he is looking like a beast right now. So hopefully he comes into a good form next year. Then, just by that, Eric Armstead moving to defensive tackle, Mason Smith going into year 2. Maybe we still got something left from Devon Hamilton, but defensive tackle group should be better just from that. And then finally, I think the edge 3 and edge 4 battles will be really interesting. I mean, the Jaguars were looking to add during the draft. Didn't really happen, really with the premium picks. They did add Jalen McLeod later on in the, on day 3 of the draft. But, post draft, they had to clean some stuff up and actually sign some guys. And the Jaguars got some guys in, Emmanuel Ogbah, a familiar name, and Dewan Smoot. They also brought in Gardeck from the Arizona Cardinals. So, the Jaguars were able to add some guys and also just have some competition, because I don't think all 3 of those guys will be on the Jaguars roster, but you have some competition for, the rotational piece. You also have competition for the developmental piece, right? You're looking at the guy that the Jaguars just drafted, Jalen McLeod from Auburn. Also Miles Cole 7th round pick last year. He made the Jaguars roster, but he's this big physical freak. He's the bulky pick, got all the physical tools, but it maybe just isn't the best right now. So he's a guy that will be competing for developmental. BJ Green, undrafted free agent from Arizona State, another guy. So yeah, the Jaguars, there's a lot going on the defensive line, right? I mean, you can make the case that everybody is, intriguing. Even 4th round pick Jordan Jefferson from last year's draft, also from LSU. There's a lot going on. So hopefully the Jaguars can, it'll be an interesting group. So hopefully a lot of stuff happens here, right? Josh Hines Allen goes back to old form. Trayvon Walker gets into his final form of this developmental player that he was. And yeah, just a lot of stuff. So we'll see. It's definitely intriguing. But with all that said, appreciate you guys for watching. Drop a like on your way out and go Jag.